Marcus Chun adjusted his helmet's display as the salvage beacon grew brighter on his scanner. The derelict ship hung in space like a twisted metal corpse, its hull scarred by weapon fire and cosmic radiation. 3 different salvage crews had already marked it as too dangerous to board, but Marcus had never been one to listen to warnings. The Zephyrian vessel was ancient by galactic standards, probably predating human contact with the Confederation by several centuries. Its design was elegant despite the damage, with flowing curves that suggested it had once been beautiful. Now it drifted silent and dark in the debris field of what had once been the Kepler station. Marcus guided his small engineering pod closer, his trained eye cataloging the damage. The ship's power core was dead. Life support had failed decades ago, and the structural integrity was compromised in at least 12 places. Any sane person would have turned around. But Marcus had spent 15 years fixing things that everyone else said were broken beyond repair. His scanning equipment picked up something unusual as he approached the main airlock. There were faint energy readings coming from deep within the ship, too weak to be a functional power source, but too strong to be just residual charge. Something was still alive in there. The other salvage teams had reported the same readings and fled, convinced the ship was haunted or booby-trapped. The Zephyrians had a reputation for leaving nasty surprises in their abandoned vessels. But Marcus had worked on enough alien technology to know the difference between a weapon signature and something else entirely. He docked his pod and cycled through the airlock, his suit's lights cutting through the darkness of the corridor beyond. The artificial gravity was gone, leaving him to navigate by pushing off bulkheads and handholds. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, powered by backup cells that should have died years ago. The ship's interior was a maze of organic curves and flowing passages that made human visitors claustrophobic. Marcus had studied Zephyrian architecture during his engineering training, but being inside one of their ships was different. Everything seemed to grow rather than being built, as if the vessel was a living thing rather than a machine. He followed his scanner deeper into the ship, past what might have been crew quarters, and through a section that looked like it had once been a garden. Dead vines still clung to the walls, and strange fruits hung desiccated from branches that had grown through gaps in the ceiling. The Zephyrians had lived among plants and animals in ways that most species found impractical. The energy signature was getting stronger, coming from what his scanner identified as a cargo bay near the ship's center. Marcus pushed himself down a final corridor, his suit lights revealing doors that stood partially open. Beyond them, he could see a large chamber filled with floating debris. He squeezed through the doorway and immediately understood why the other salvage teams had run. The cargo bay was filled with cages. Dozens of them, all empty, their doors hanging open like dead mouths. Whatever had been kept here had either escaped or died long ago. The sight sent a chill down Marcus's spine as he imagined what kinds of creatures the Zephyrians might have been transporting. But his scanner was insistent. The energy reading was coming from the far corner of the bay, behind a stack of larger containment units. Marcus pushed himself across the chamber, weaving between floating pieces of debris and trying not to think about what they might be. He found the source of the energy reading behind the largest cage of all. It was different from the others, built like a prison cell rather than a simple container. Heavy bars made from some kind of energy-resistant alloy, locks that required 3 different keys to open, and restraint systems that suggested whatever had been kept inside was both dangerous and valuable. Inside the cage, chained to the back wall with restraints that glowed faintly with their own power, was a creature unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. At first glance, it looked almost like a large cat, covered in fur that seemed to shift color in the light from his suit. But there were too many differences for it to be anything remotely related to Earth animals. The creature was clearly female, with 6 legs instead of 4, and a tail that ended in something that looked like a flower made of crystalline spines. Her face was elongated like a cat's, but with large eyes that held an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. Those eyes were watching him now, alert but showing no fear. Around her, pressed against her body for warmth and protection, were three smaller versions of herself. Kittens, Marcus realized, though they were unlike any kittens he had ever imagined. They mewed softly as his lights hit them, sounds that carried even through his suit's audio pickups. The restraints holding the adult were clearly designed to be permanent. Energy shackles that would prevent her from using whatever natural abilities her species possessed, and chains that would keep her immobilized indefinitely. Someone had wanted to make sure she could never escape. Marcus floated there for a long moment, staring at the family trapped in the cage. His rational mind told him to leave. This was clearly some kind of prisoner transport, and the creature inside might be dangerous. She could be a criminal, a weapon, or something worse. The smart thing would be to report the find to the authorities and let them handle it. But looking at those kittens, seeing how they clung to their mother in the cold darkness, Marcus knew he couldn't walk away. Whatever this creature had done or been accused of, her children were innocent, and they were all dying slowly in this tomb of a ship. He moved closer to the cage, and the adult creature watched him approach. She didn't growl or try to attack. Instead, she seemed to be studying him with the same intensity that he was studying her. When he reached the bars, she made a sound that was almost like a purr, but deeper and more complex. Marcus examined the lock mechanism and felt his heart sink. It was a Zephyrian quantum lock, designed to open only for specific biological signatures. Without the original keys or the prison transport's computer system, it would take him days to break through. Days that this family didn't have. The creature seemed to sense his frustration. She shifted slightly, and one of her forelegs emerged from beneath a kitten. Marcus could see that she was wearing something on her wrist, a device that looked almost like a translation unit. When she moved her paw in a specific pattern, holographic symbols appeared in the air between them. It took Marcus a moment to realize what he was seeing. The symbols were mathematical equations, written in a notation system that was universal across most spacefaring species. The creature was trying to communicate with him using math. The equations were elegant and complex, describing power flow patterns and energy conversion ratios. It took Marcus several minutes to understand what she was trying to tell him, but when he did, he almost laughed out loud. She was giving him the technical specifications for her own restraints, showing him exactly how to disable them safely. She was an engineer just like him. Marcus pulled out his cutting tools and got to work. The restraints were sophisticated, but the creature's instructions were precise. She walked him through each step of the process, using her mathematical language to warn him of dangerous feedback loops and suggest more efficient approaches to the problems he encountered. As he worked, the kittens began to move around more, sensing that something was changing. They made soft sounds that might have been questions, and their mother responded with gentle mathematical phrases that somehow conveyed comfort and reassurance. When the last restraint finally clicked open, the adult creature didn't immediately move. Instead, she continued to communicate through her mathematical symbols, this time introducing herself. Her name was something that translated roughly to Builder of Connections, and she had been a ship's engineer before her capture. The kittens, she explained, were named from mathematical concepts. The smallest was variable, the middle one was constant, and the largest was function. Hearing their names made them somehow more real to Marcus, transforming them from anonymous aliens into individuals with personalities and hopes. Builder of Connections gathered her children close and then did something unexpected. She bowed to Marcus, a gesture that needed no translation. Then she began working on something attached to the wall of the cage, her 6 limbs moving with practiced precision. What she was building, Marcus realized, was a portable power source. She was cannibalizing parts of her own restraint system to create a device that could keep them all alive during the journey back to his ship. Even after years of imprisonment, her first instinct was to engineer a solution to their immediate problem. Marcus helped her work, following her mathematical instructions and marveling at her ingenuity. She was working with scraps and broken components, but her design was brilliant. When they finished, they had created a device that could power their environmental suits for weeks. Getting the family back to his pod was easier than Marcus had expected. Builder of Connections moved through zero gravity with graceful efficiency, carrying 2 of her kittens while the third rode on Marcus's back. The little one seemed fascinated by his suit's displays, reaching out with tiny paws to touch the holographic readouts. As they made their way through the dead ship, Builder of Connections paused at several locations to examine damaged systems. Each time, she would generate mathematical descriptions of what she was seeing, cataloging the ship's problems with professional interest. Even in her desperate situation, she couldn't resist analyzing the engineering challenges around her. When they reached Marcus's pod, he faced a new problem. His life support system was designed for 1 human, not 4 aliens with different atmospheric requirements. But Builder of Connections was already studying his environmental controls, her mathematical language flowing as she described modifications that would make the journey possible for all of them. Working together, they reconfigured his pod systems in ways that Marcus would never have imagined. Her understanding of life support engineering was far more advanced than human technology, and she shared her knowledge freely. By the time they were finished, Marcus's pod wasn't just capable of supporting all of them. It was actually more efficient than it had been before. As they prepared to leave the derelict ship, Marcus found himself wondering what Builder of Connections had done to warrant imprisonment. Looking at her children, watching the way she had immediately trusted him and shared her knowledge, he couldn't imagine her being a criminal. But those questions would have to wait. For now, they were all alive and heading towards safety. And Marcus had learned something important about the nature of engineering. It was a language that transcended species, a way of solving problems that could bring very different beings together. The stars wheeled around them as Marcus's pod left the derelict ship behind, carrying its unusual passengers toward an uncertain but hopeful future. In the small cabin, Builder of Connections curled protectively around her kittens, her eyes never leaving the human who had chosen to save them when everyone else had turned away. The journey to the nearest space station took 18 hours, and Marcus spent most of that time learning to communicate with his passengers. Builder of Connections had an amazing ability to express complex ideas through mathematical notation, but the kittens were too young for such sophisticated communication. They relied on sounds, gestures, and what Marcus was beginning to recognize as emotional mathematics, simple equations that seemed to convey feelings rather than technical concepts. Variable, the smallest kitten, was fascinated by Marcus's tablet computer. She would pat the screen with her tiny paws, watching the displays change and making soft chirping sounds when new images appeared. Constant preferred to explore the pod's interior, investigating every surface and mechanism with the methodical thoroughness of a born engineer. Function, the largest of the 3, seemed content to stay close to his mother. But Marcus noticed that his large eyes tracked every movement and conversation. Builder of Connections spent the trip studying Marcus's engineering manuals, her mathematical commentary revealing insights that made him see his own field in entirely new ways. She had an intuitive understanding of energy flow and system integration that far exceeded anything in human textbooks. When she showed him how to optimize his pod's fusion engine output by 17% using only software modifications, Marcus realized he was in the presence of a genius. But beneath her professional fascination with human technology, Marcus could sense her worry about what would happen when they reached civilization. Her mathematical expressions occasionally carried undertones of anxiety, equations that described probability distributions with too many negative outcomes. When Kepler Station appeared on their sensors, Builder of Connections gathered her kittens close and began what Marcus recognized as a formal mathematical presentation. She was telling him her story, using precise notation to describe events that had changed her life forever. She had been the chief engineer on a Zephyrian exploration vessel, responsible for maintaining systems that supported a crew of 200. Her ship had been investigating reports of a derelict alien facility in an unexplored system when they encountered something unexpected, a massive automated defense network left behind by an extinct civilization. The facility's guardians had disabled her ship and captured her crew, but Builder of Connections had managed to send out a distress signal before being taken prisoner. What happened next was still unclear to her, but when Zephyrian rescue ships arrived weeks later, they found the ancient facility destroyed and most of her crew dead. The rescue team's investigation concluded that Builder of Connections had somehow activated the facility's self-destruct mechanism, causing the explosion that killed her crewmates. She was charged with sabotage and mass murder, despite her protests that she had been trying to save them. The evidence seemed overwhelming. Her engineering access codes had been used to trigger the destruction, and she was the only survivor. Her mathematical description of the trial was heartbreaking in its precision. She had been pregnant at the time, which saved her from immediate execution, but condemned her to life imprisonment. Her kittens had been born in captivity, and all 4 of them had been aboard the prison transport when it was attacked by raiders. Marcus found himself believing her story completely. The mathematical way she described the events carried emotional undertones that spoke of genuine grief and confusion. This was someone who had lost everything and still didn't understand why. As they docked at Kepler Station, Marcus made a decision that he knew would complicate his life enormously. Instead of turning Builder of Connections over to the authorities immediately, he requested temporary custody as a salvage consultant. It was a legal gray area, but his reputation as an engineer gave him some credibility. The station's security chief, a gruff Terran named Rodriguez, wasn't happy about the arrangement. "Chun, do you have any idea what you're doing? That's a convicted terrorist you've got there." Marcus had expected this reaction. The Zephyrian justice system was notoriously harsh, and their criminals were feared throughout the galaxy. But looking at Builder of Connections and her kittens huddled together in the station's temporary holding area, he couldn't see terrorists. He saw a family that had been through hell and needed help. "She's an engineer, Rodriguez. She helped me modify my pod's life support system using techniques that are decades ahead of anything we have. Does that sound like something a saboteur would do?" Rodriguez wasn't convinced. "Smart criminals are the most dangerous kind. I'm giving you 48 hours to get your story straight. Then, I'm calling the Confederation authorities." Those 48 hours became a crash course in Zephyrian law and galactic politics. Marcus reached out to contacts throughout the engineering community, looking for anyone who might have information about Builder of Connections' case. What he found was disturbing. The ancient facility that had destroyed her ship wasn't unique. Similar installations had been discovered in 3 other systems, always with the same result. They would capture intruders, study them for weeks, then destroy everything within light years of their location. Each incident had claimed hundreds of lives and left behind mysteries that no one could solve. But in Builder of Connections' case, someone had survived. The facility had been destroyed, yes, but in a way that suggested deliberate action rather than automatic self-defense. The explosion pattern indicated that someone with intimate knowledge of the facility's systems had carefully orchestrated its destruction to minimize the damage to the surrounding area. Marcus began to suspect that Builder of Connections hadn't caused the disaster. She had prevented it from being much worse. His investigation led him to Dr. Sarah Kim, a human xenoarchaeologist who had studied the ancient facility sites. She had her own theories about what had really happened, theories that contradicted the official Zephyrian investigation. The evidence never made sense, Dr. Kim explained during their video conference. Those facilities were designed to be impregnable. The idea that one engineer could break into their control systems and trigger a self-destruct is absurd. But if someone was trying to disable the facility from the inside while being held prisoner, Dr. Kim's research suggested that the ancient installations were weapons designed to capture and study potential threats before eliminating them. The civilization that built them had been paranoid about contamination from other species, and their automated guardians reflected that paranoia. "If your Zephyr engineer really did what I think she did," Dr. Kim continued, "then she didn't commit mass murder. She prevented genocide. Those facilities were designed to sterilize entire star systems if they detected what they considered threats. Marcus brought this information to Builder of Connections, translating Dr. Kim's theories into mathematical notation. Her response was immediate and intense, a cascade of equations that expressed recognition, relief, and, finally, anger. She had suspected the truth, but had never been able to prove it. The facility's guardians had indeed been preparing to eliminate all life in the system, considering the Zephyrian presence to be a contamination that needed cleansing. Builder of Connections had been forced to choose between saving her crew and saving billions of lives in the surrounding systems. She had sacrificed her crewmates to prevent a much larger catastrophe, but no one had been willing to listen to her explanation. The Zephyrian justice system had needed someone to blame for the tragedy, and she had been the convenient target. As Marcus worked to compile evidence for Builder of Connections' defense, he found himself growing attached to the small family. The kittens had begun to trust him completely, climbing onto his shoulders and purring their complex mathematical songs while he worked. Variable had figured out how to interface directly with his computer systems, displaying an intuitive understanding of human technology that amazed him. Builder of Connections herself had become an invaluable colleague. Her insights into engineering problems had already helped Marcus solve 3 impossible repair jobs around the station. She approached every challenge with a combination of rigorous mathematical analysis and creative thinking that produced solutions no human engineer would have imagined. When Rodriguez's deadline arrived, Marcus was ready with a formal request for asylum based on new evidence. He presented Dr. Kim's research, his own analysis of the ancient facility incidents, and a detailed technical assessment of Builder of Connections' capabilities as an engineer. The Confederation authorities were skeptical, but they agreed to review the case. In the meantime, Builder of Connections and her kittens would remain in Marcus's custody as technical consultants. It was a temporary victory, but it gave them time to build a stronger case. More importantly, it gave Marcus the chance to show the galaxy that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is trust someone that everyone else fears. Over the following weeks, Builder of Connections proved her worth repeatedly. She revolutionized the station's power distribution system, designed improvements to their docking mechanisms that increased efficiency by 30%, and solved a critical failure in their waste recycling systems that had been plaguing the crew for months. The kittens, meanwhile, were growing quickly and developing their own engineering talents. Variable had become Marcus's unofficial assistant, her small size allowing her to access maintenance areas that were difficult for larger beings to reach. Constant had appointed himself inspector of all mechanical systems, conducting thorough examinations that often uncovered potential problems before they became serious. Function was developing what Marcus recognized as leadership qualities, coordinating his siblings' activities with remarkable sophistication for someone so young. But even as they built new lives on the station, Marcus knew that their situation remained precarious. The Zephyrian government wanted Builder of Connections back, and they had powerful allies in the Confederation. It would take more than engineering excellence to keep his unusual family safe. The answer, when it came, would challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about justice, loyalty, and the price of doing what was right. 3 months after rescuing Builder of Connections and her kittens, Marcus found himself at the center of an interstellar incident. The Zephyrian government had sent a formal extradition request to the Confederation Council, demanding the return of their escaped terrorist and threatening economic sanctions if their demands weren't met. The story had attracted media attention throughout human space and beyond. Engineers from dozens of species had rallied to Builder of Connections' defense, citing her innovative work and questioning the original investigation. But political pressure was mounting, and Marcus could see that the Confederation authorities were preparing to cave in to Zephyrian demands. Builder of Connections seemed to sense the approaching crisis. Her mathematical communications had taken on undertones of resignation and preparation for separation. She spent increasing amounts of time with her kittens, teaching them advanced engineering concepts that Marcus realized were meant to help them survive without her. The breaking point came when a Zephyrian cruiser arrived at Kepler Station with orders to take Builder of Connections into custody immediately. The ship's captain, a stern-faced individual named Commander Veltar, wasted no time in presenting his authority to station security. Marcus was in his workshop when the alert came through. Builder of Connections was with him, helping to diagnose a complex problem with the station's gravity generators, while Variable explored the intricate machinery with her usual curiosity. The kitten was the first to sense something wrong, her mathematical chirping shifting to alarm tones that immediately caught her mother's attention. "They've come for me," Builder of Connections communicated through her equations, her mathematical language carrying a depth of sadness that made Marcus's chest tighten. "You must protect my children." Marcus had been dreading this moment, but he wasn't about to give up without a fight. "We're not done yet. I've got one more card to play." Over the past weeks, Marcus had been working quietly on a project that could change everything. Using Builder of Connections insights into ancient technology, he had been analyzing the data from all 4 facility incidents. What he had discovered was explosive. The ancient installations weren't random weapons left behind by a dead civilization. They were components of a vast network, designed to activate simultaneously if certain conditions were met. The facility that Builder of Connections had destroyed had been attempting to communicate with the others, preparing for a coordinated strike against all spacefaring civilizations in the galaxy. By stopping the signal, Builder of Connections hadn't just prevented one system's destruction. She had prevented the extinction of all intelligent life in their region of space. Marcus had the proof, but he needed a platform to present it. That's where his real trump card came in. Over the years, he had built a reputation not just as an engineer, but as someone who could solve impossible problems. That reputation had earned him some powerful friends, including Admiral Chun of the Terran Fleet, his own older sister. Admiral Chun arrived at Kepler Station aboard the heavy cruiser Endeavour just as Commander Veltar was preparing to transfer his prisoner. The timing wasn't coincidental. Marcus had sent his sister everything he had discovered, along with a desperate request for help. The confrontation in the station's main docking bay was tense, but civilized. Commander Veltar had legal authority on his side, but Admiral Chun had something more powerful: irrefutable evidence that the Zephyrian justice system had made a catastrophic mistake. "Commander," Admiral Chun said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I'm invoking Article 15 of the Confederation Defense Protocols. This individual is under Terran protection pending a full investigation into matters of galactic security." Veltar's expression darkened. "Admiral, you exceed your authority. This criminal belongs to Zephyrian justice." "This hero," Admiral Chun corrected, "prevented the extinction of every spacefaring species in our galactic arm. The evidence is overwhelming, and it's about to become very public." The data that Marcus and Builder of Connections had compiled painted a terrifying picture. The ancient civilization had been methodically preparing for what they called the final cleansing, the elimination of all potential threats to their vision of galactic purity. The facility network was their tool for achieving this goal, with each installation serving as both a research station and a weapon of mass destruction. Builder of Connections had sacrificed everything to prevent this catastrophe, and the Zephyrian government had rewarded her heroism with imprisonment and exile. The injustice was so profound that even some Zephyrian officials began to question their own system's findings. The revelation sparked a political crisis that reached the highest levels of Confederation government. Emergency sessions were called, committees formed, and investigations launched. But while the politicians debated, Marcus focused on what mattered most to him: keeping Builder of Connections and her family safe. The kittens had grown considerably during their time on the station, and their personalities were becoming more distinct. Variable had developed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose system failures, often detecting problems that sophisticated sensors missed. Constant had become fascinated with human engineering philosophy, spending hours discussing the ethical implications of different design choices. Function was emerging as a natural leader, coordinating complex projects with remarkable skill for someone so young. All three kittens were also developing their mother's gift for mathematical communication, though their styles were uniquely their own. Variables equations were elegant and intuitive, constants were methodical and precise, and functions carried an underlying sense of authority that suggested future leadership potential. As the political situation continued to evolve, Marcus found himself taking on an unexpected role as an advocate for Builder of Connections and others like her. The ancient facility crisis had revealed that the galaxy was full of misunderstood heroes, individuals who had made difficult choices to protect others, only to be punished by systems that couldn't or wouldn't see the bigger picture. Working with Admiral Chun and a growing coalition of allies, Marcus helped establish what became known as the Hero Protection Protocols, legal frameworks designed to prevent future injustices like the one that had befallen Builder of Connections. But the most important changes were happening on a much smaller scale. Builder of Connections was no longer just a refugee seeking asylum. She was becoming a bridge between species, using her unique perspective to solve problems that had seemed insurmountable. Her work on improving interspecies communication protocols revolutionized diplomatic exchanges throughout the Confederation. Her designs for hybrid life support systems allowed mixed-species crews to work together more effectively than ever before. And her insights into ancient technology helped other archaeological teams safely investigate dangerous sites without triggering automated defenses. The kittens were following in their mother's footsteps, each developing specialties that complemented her own. Variable became an expert in sensor technology, designing detection systems that could identify problems before they became critical. Constant focused on structural engineering, creating frameworks that could adapt to the needs of multiple species simultaneously. Function developed a talent for project management, coordinating complex installations that required the cooperation of dozens of different engineers. Commander Veltar remained on the station for several weeks as the political situation unfolded, and Marcus watched his attitude toward Builder of Connections gradually change. Initially convinced of her guilt, the Zephyrian officer found himself confronted with evidence that challenged everything he believed about his government's justice system. The turning point came when a second ancient facility was discovered in Zephyrian space, and Builder of Connections volunteered to help investigate it safely. Her knowledge of the ancient technology allowed the research team to disable the installation's defenses without triggering its weapon systems, saving countless lives. Veltar was part of the investigation team, and Marcus could see the moment when the Zephyrian commander finally understood what Builder of Connections had really done all those years ago. The mathematical precision with which she disabled the facility's threatening systems was clearly the work of someone who had done the same thing before. Someone who had sacrificed her crew not out of malice, but out of desperate necessity. When they returned to Kepler Station, Veltar did something that surprised everyone, including his own crew. He formally apologized to Builder of Connections, acknowledging that the Zephyrian justice system had failed her catastrophically. "You are a hero to my people," he said, his words translated through the universal communication system, "even if we were too blind to see it. I will carry the truth back to Zephyria, and I will make sure that your sacrifice is properly honored." The apology meant more to Builder of Connections than any official exoneration could have. For the first time since her imprisonment began, she could hold her head high, knowing that at least some of her own people understood what she had really done. As Commander Veltar prepared to depart, he made one final gesture that would have profound implications for the future. He officially transferred custody of Builder of Connections and her kittens to Marcus, recognizing him as their legal guardian under both Zephyrian and Confederation law. The family that had begun as a rescue mission was now official, crossing species lines in a way that would have been unthinkable just months before. Marcus found himself not just with 3 adopted children and a brilliant colleague, but with a responsibility to help reshape how the galaxy thought about justice, family, and the bonds that could form between very different beings. But their most challenging test was still ahead of them, as enemies of their newfound alliance began to plot against everything they had built together. 6 months after Builder of Connections' exoneration, Marcus thought their troubles were behind them. The family had settled into a comfortable routine on Kepler Station, with Builder of Connections serving as Chief Systems Integration Specialist, and her kittens pursuing their individual interests within the engineering department. But peace, as Marcus was about to learn, was more fragile than he had imagined. The first sign of trouble came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yalin Chris, a prominent Confederation scientist, published a research paper questioning the official findings about the ancient facilities. According to Dr. Chris, the installations had been peaceful research stations, not weapons, and their destruction represented the loss of invaluable archaeological treasures. More troubling was Dr. Chris's suggestion that Builder of Connections had destroyed the facilities deliberately to hide evidence of Zephyrian war crimes. The paper painted her as a saboteur who had manipulated human sympathies to escape justice for her original crimes. Marcus might have dismissed the accusations as academic nonsense, but Dr. Chris had backing from powerful political figures who opposed the growing cooperation between different species. The Hero Protection Protocols had disrupted established power structures, and there were those who wanted them dismantled. Builder of Connections took the attacks stoically, responding with mathematical precision to each accusation. But Marcus could see that the constant scrutiny was wearing on her. Worse, it was affecting the kittens, who were struggling to understand why beings they had never met were saying terrible things about their mother. Variable became withdrawn and anxious, spending long hours double-checking system diagnostics, as if afraid that any mistake might be used as evidence against them. Constant threw himself into theoretical work, creating elaborate mathematical proofs that demonstrated his mother's innocence with obsessive thoroughness. Function, the most sensitive to others' emotions, began having what Marcus recognized as nightmares, waking with mathematical cries of distress that broke everyone's hearts. The situation escalated when Dr. Chris arrived at Kepler Station with a team of investigators, claiming authority under the Confederation Archaeological Preservation Act. Their stated goal was to conduct an objective review of the ancient facility evidence, but Marcus suspected their real purpose was to build a case against Builder of Connections. Dr. Chris was a tall, imposing figure with the kind of academic arrogance that Marcus had encountered before in his career. He spoke in carefully modulated tones that suggested objectivity while delivering accusations that were anything but neutral. "Mr. Chun," Dr. Chris said during their first meeting, "I understand your emotional attachment to these subjects, but we must consider the possibility that you've been deceived. The Zephyrian capacity for manipulation is well documented." Marcus felt his temper rising. "The only deception here is your attempt to rewrite history. We have solid evidence that Builder of Connections saved billions of lives. Evidence provided by the same individual who stands accused," Dr. Chris countered. "Hardly objective. My team will conduct proper scientific analysis, free from emotional bias." Builder of Connections was present for the meeting, and Marcus could see her mathematical communications shifting to patterns that indicated deep hurt. She had faced accusations before, but having her scientific integrity questioned struck at the core of who she was. Dr. Chris's investigation team spent weeks analyzing every piece of data related to the ancient facilities. They interviewed witnesses, reviewed technical specifications, and reconstructed the events that had led to the installation's destruction. But instead of seeking truth, they seemed determined to twist every piece of evidence to support their predetermined conclusions. The turning point came when Dr. Chris attempted to interview the kittens separately from their mother, claiming he needed uncontaminated testimony from the youngest witnesses. Marcus refused to allow it, recognizing the tactic as an attempt to intimidate children who were already traumatized by the experience. "These are children," Marcus said firmly. "They don't know anything about events that happened before they were born. They may have inherited genetic memories," Dr. Chris insisted. "Zephyrian neural development is complex. We need to examine them thoroughly." The suggestion that the kittens should be subjected to invasive testing was the last straw for Builder of Connections. Her mathematical communication exploded into patterns that Marcus had never seen before, complex equations that expressed outrage, protective fury, and a determination to defend her children at any cost. Function, responding to his mother's distress, positioned himself between Dr. Chris and his siblings with a dignity that was remarkable for someone so young. His mathematical communication was clear and unmistakable. "You will not harm my family." The standoff might have escalated into something worse, but Admiral Chin chose that moment to arrive on the station with news that changed everything. Her intelligence teams had uncovered evidence of Dr. Chris's true motivations. He was being funded by a consortium of weapons manufacturers who saw the ancient technology as a potential source of new military applications. "The good doctor isn't interested in archaeological preservation," Admiral Chin explained. "He's trying to discredit Builder of Connections so he can gain access to the facility data without interference from ethical oversight committees." The revelation cast Dr. Chris's entire investigation in a new light. His team hadn't been seeking truth. They had been building a case that would allow corporate interests to exploit technology that had nearly caused galactic genocide. Confronted with evidence of his deception, Dr. Chris made a strategic retreat, but not before issuing threats about future investigations. Marcus knew this wouldn't be the end of their troubles, but at least the immediate crisis had passed. The incident had unexpected positive consequences. Function's brave defense of his family had been recorded by the station's security systems, and the footage quickly spread throughout the galactic network. The sight of young beings standing up to intimidation from corrupt adults resonated with audiences across dozens of species. Variable used the newfound attention to launch a campaign for better protection of refugee families, creating communication protocols that allowed separated beings to stay in contact across interstellar distances. Constant developed new educational programs that taught young beings about scientific ethics and the importance of questioning authority when it conflicted with moral principles. Builder of Connections found herself in demand as a consultant for organizations dealing with ancient technology. Her expertise had saved lives repeatedly, and the failed attempt to discredit her had only strengthened her reputation. More importantly, the experience had shown her that she was no longer alone in her fight for justice. Marcus discovered that their unconventional family had become a symbol of hope for others who had been failed by traditional systems. Refugees, exiles, and outcasts from across the galaxy began reaching out to them for help and guidance. The hero protection protocols had grown into something larger than anyone had anticipated, a movement that challenged the fundamental assumptions about justice, family, and belonging that had shaped galactic civilization for millennia. But with greater influence came greater responsibility. As Marcus looked around at his growing extended family, Builder of Connections working alongside human engineers as equals, the kittens pursuing their own unique paths while staying true to their mother's values, he realized that they had become something unprecedented. They were proof that the barriers between species were artificial constructs, maintained by fear and prejudice rather than genuine incompatibility. Engineering, as Builder of Connections had shown him, was indeed a universal language, but it was more than that. It was a way of thinking about problems that transcended the limitations of any single species. The kittens were living examples of this truth. Raised with exposure to both Zephyrian and human approaches to engineering, they were developing hybrid techniques that neither species could have achieved alone. Variable's intuitive diagnostics combined Zephyrian mathematical elegance with human pragmatism. Constant structural designs merged his mother's organic aesthetics with human durability standards. Function's leadership style balanced Zephyrian consensus building with human decisiveness. They were the future, Marcus realized, not just of engineering, but of galactic civilization itself. And that future was worth protecting against anyone who would try to tear it down out of fear, greed, or simple prejudice. As Dr. Chris's transport disappeared into hyperspace, Marcus made a promise to himself and to his family. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They had already proven that love and trust could bridge any gap, solve any problem, and overcome any obstacle. But their greatest test was still approaching, one that would require not just technical skill and moral courage, but the kind of sacrifice that only a true family could make for each other. 2 years after their first meeting on the derelict ship, Marcus faced the most difficult decision of his life. The Confederation Science Council had approved a mission to investigate a newly discovered cluster of ancient facilities in the Galactic Rim, and they wanted Builder of Connections to lead the technical team. It was the kind of opportunity that could establish her as one of the galaxy's foremost experts on ancient technology, finally erasing the last shadows of her past imprisonment. But the mission would take her away from Kepler Station for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The kittens, now approaching adolescence, would have to choose whether to accompany their mother into potentially dangerous territory or remain in the safety of the station they had come to consider home. The family discussion that followed was conducted in the mathematical language that had become their primary form of private communication. Marcus had learned enough of their notation to follow the basic concepts, but the emotional undertones were beyond his understanding. He could only watch as Builder of Connections and her children worked through one of the most complex decisions any family could face. Variable was the first to reach a conclusion. Her equations expressed excitement about the scientific opportunities the mission would provide, combined with confidence in her own abilities to handle whatever challenges they might encounter. At 15 human years old, she had already surpassed most adult engineers in her diagnostic capabilities. Function's response was more complex. His mathematical communication showed deep consideration of the risks and benefits, not just for himself, but for the entire family. At 17, he had developed the kind of strategic thinking that suggested future leadership potential, and Marcus could see him weighing factors that the others hadn't even considered. Constant surprised everyone by expressing reluctance to leave the station. His equations revealed attachment to the research projects he had established there, including a comprehensive study of interspecies engineering collaboration that was nearing completion. At 16, he had found his calling as a theorist and teacher, and he was concerned about abandoning work that could benefit countless beings. Builder of Connections listened to each of her children with the patience that had characterized all her interactions with them. When they finished expressing their views, she began her own mathematical presentation, not a decision, but a framework for making one that honored everyone's needs and concerns. Marcus found himself moved by the sight of this alien family working through their dilemma with such care and consideration. In his experience, human families often handled such decisions with emotion and argument. But Builder of Connections and her children approached the problem like the engineering challenge it was, seeking a solution that would optimize outcomes for all parties involved. The solution they developed was elegantly complex. Builder of Connections would accept the mission, but she would take only Variable with her initially. Variable's diagnostic abilities would be crucial for safely investigating the ancient installations, and the experience would complete her education as an engineer. Function would remain on Kepler Station to coordinate the support team from there, using his leadership skills to manage the complex logistics of a long-distance scientific mission. Constant would continue his research, but would join the mission if his theoretical expertise became needed. Marcus would oversee the station-based operations while maintaining regular contact with the expedition team. It wasn't a perfect solution. The family would be separated for the first time since their rescue, but it honored everyone's individual goals while maintaining their collective bonds. The mission to the Rim cluster turned out to be even more significant than anyone had anticipated. The facilities there were different from the ones that Builder of Connections had encountered before. Older, more sophisticated, and apparently designed for a different purpose entirely. Working with Variable at her side, Builder of Connections made a discovery that revolutionized understanding of the ancient civilization. The Rim installations weren't weapons or research stations. They were archives, vast libraries containing the collected knowledge of dozens of extinct species. The civilization that had built the network had originally been explorers and preservationists dedicated to documenting and protecting the achievements of every intelligent species they encountered. The weapon systems that had made the other facilities so dangerous were later additions, installed during a period of cultural decline and paranoia that had ultimately led to their own extinction. Builder of Connections' ability to communicate with the archive systems opened up treasures of knowledge that had been lost for millions of years. Engineering techniques that could revolutionize technology across the galaxy, scientific principles that explained phenomena that had puzzled researchers for centuries, and philosophical insights that offered new ways of understanding consciousness and intelligence itself. Variable proved to be more than just a talented assistant during the mission. Her unique perspective, shaped by growing up in a mixed-species environment, allowed her to see patterns in the archive data that even her mother missed. The ancient civilization's decline had begun when they stopped learning from other species and started fearing them instead, a lesson that had profound implications for contemporary galactic society. Back on Kepler Station, Function coordinated the mission support with remarkable skill. His regular communications with the expedition team kept everyone connected despite the vast distances involved, and his management of the research data ensured that the discoveries reached the scientific community as quickly as possible. Constance's theoretical work took on new importance as the mission progressed. His models for interspecies collaboration provided frameworks for organizing and understanding the archived knowledge in ways that made it accessible to contemporary researchers. His work became the foundation for new academic programs that would shape engineering education for generations to come. Marcus found himself serving as more than just a supervisor during the family separation. He became a bridge between the expedition team and the support staff, translating between different communication styles and ensuring that everyone understood the broader implications of what they were discovering. The mission's success exceeded all expectations, but it also created new challenges. The knowledge contained in the archives was too valuable to be controlled by any single organization or species. Questions arose about access rights, intellectual property, and the responsibility that came with such powerful information. Builder of Connections found herself at the center of these debates, but she approached them with the same mathematical precision that she brought to all problems. Working with allies across the galaxy, she helped establish the Archive Accord, an agreement that ensured the ancient knowledge would be shared freely among all species while preventing its misuse for destructive purposes. When the family finally reunited on Kepler Station 8 months after the mission began, Marcus was struck by how much they had all grown. Variable had matured into a confident young engineer with her own unique expertise. Function had developed into a natural leader whose skills were already being sought by major organizations throughout the galaxy. Constant had become a respected academic whose theoretical work was influencing researchers across dozens of species. Builder of Connections herself had evolved from a refugee seeking justice into one of the galaxy's most influential figures. Her combination of technical brilliance and moral authority made her a trusted voice on issues ranging from ancient technology to interspecies relations. But perhaps the most important change was in Marcus himself. When he had first encountered Builder of Connections and her kittens in that prison cage, he had seen beings in need of rescue. Now he understood that they had rescued him just as much as he had rescued them. His narrow view of engineering as a purely human discipline had expanded to embrace a galaxy-spanning perspective that saw problems and solutions in ways he never could have imagined alone. His understanding of family had grown to encompass bonds that transcended species barriers. Most importantly, his sense of what was possible had been transformed by witnessing what could be achieved when beings chose trust over fear. The workshop where Marcus had first learned to communicate with Builder of Connections through mathematical equations had grown into a center for interspecies engineering collaboration. Young beings from dozens of species came there to learn not just technical skills, but the deeper principles of cooperation that made true innovation possible. Variable had established a diagnostic consulting service that helped solve problems throughout the sector. Function was developing leadership training programs that prepared beings from different species to work together effectively. Constant's Theoretical Research Center had become a model for academic collaboration that was being copied across the galaxy. As Marcus looked around at what they had built together, he realized that their story had become larger than any of them had expected. They had started as a human engineer and a refugee family seeking justice, but they had become something unprecedented, proof that the future of galactic civilization lay not in the dominance of any single species, but in the collaboration of all intelligent beings working together. The ancient archive network that Builder of Connections had unlocked contained knowledge from civilizations that had failed because they stopped trusting each other. But it also contained the tools for building something better. A galactic community based on mutual respect, shared knowledge, and the understanding that every species had something valuable to contribute. Standing in his workshop, watching Builder of Connections work alongside human engineers while her children pursued their own unique paths, Marcus knew that they had accomplished something that would echo through history. They had proven that love could transcend any barrier, that trust could overcome any fear, and that families could form in the most unexpected ways. The universe was vast and full of challenges, but Marcus no longer faced them alone. He had a family that spanned species, a community that embraced difference, and a future that held infinite possibilities for those brave enough to reach out and build bridges across the darkness between the stars. As Variable called out a mathematical equation that made everyone laugh, as Function coordinated another complex project with patient skill, as Constant explained a theoretical breakthrough that would reshape how beings thought about consciousness itself, and as Builder of Connections looked up from her work to smile at the family they had built together, Marcus knew that his decision to rescue 3 aliens from a derelict ship had been the most important engineering project of his life. Some solutions, he had learned, couldn't be calculated or designed. They could only be lived one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time, one gesture of trust at a time. And in the end, those are the most important kinds of engineering of all. The engineering of hope, family, and a future worth building for everyone.